Give a very warm welcome to Ed Gillespie.
Good morning, everyone. Absolute pleasure to be here. When I first walked down this morning and I saw the big banner saying "Service Dealer supporting the nation's dealers," I thought I'd ended up in the decriminalisation of marijuana in America, and that we're all going to be having a very different morning. I am not going to cover everything. Obviously, I mean, Duncan has just set out a massive stall for me to try and rove through over the next sort of 40 minutes or so. But I will do my very best to give some provocations about the way the world is changing, some of which I'm sure you will connect with. So I'll call this presentation "One Drone Went to Mow a Meadow." And I always start my talks actually with trying to understand a little bit of the high-level context in which we're operating, because we're not divorced from the reality out there, and it is challenging. And a lot of the issues people talk about, we have this joke about saving the planet and killing yourself. Well, I mean, the planet is actually probably going to be okay. It's been here 4.5 billion years. It'll be here long after we've gone. It's kind of us who are screwed at the moment. My friend Michael Paulin, the environmental architect, tells a lovely joke about two planets walking along through space. And one starts itching and scratching and looking really uncomfortable. And the other one says, "What's wrong?" And the first one says, "I've got a terrible case of Homo sapiens." And the other one says, "Don't worry, be gone soon." So the planet will shake us off like a bad case of fleas. We might well take quite a lot of the biosphere with us, which would not be a great thing to do. But bear in mind, this is not about tree hugging, this is about saving us. And this is kind of where we find ourselves on the kind of consumer treadmill of modern late neoliberal capitalism. This is, it's not Nick Clegg actually, this is a guy from Fight Club, Tyler Durden, if you recognise him. And he famously said, "We buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like who largely don't care." And the weather is going to get more volatile. The simple fact of putting more heat into the global system as a result of climate change is going to make things much more turbulent. The 3 Category 5 hurricanes that raced across the Gulf of Mexico in 2017 and hitting the United States caused over $300 billion worth of damage to the US economy. It's interesting that no climate deniers are setting up insurance companies right now. That would be really putting your money where your mouth is as a climate denier. Nothing to worry about here, and I'm going to set up an insurance company to prove it. They won't do it. And if you want the most visceral, visual representation of the climate challenge, this is Glacier National Park in the US on fire. That's taken this summer. So that's Glacier National Park on fire. And we don't even need reminding of what's happening in California at the moment with the deadly wildfires out there. 45 people tragically killed in the last week or so. And this is in the heart of the very culture which has disseminated climate denial around the world. So this is the chickens really coming home to roost. So we've got 12 years to turn this around. You're interested, we're talking about succession, we're talking about the longevity of our business. This is all going to happen on our watch. 12 years. Hands up if you've got a kid under 10. So about a third of the room. If you've got a grandchild under 10. Yeah. So by the time all of those kids get to university, we need to have fixed this problem. And that's going to happen in the career of most of the people in this room. So within the next 10 or 12 years. So just to sharpen our minds about the transition which is coming. Because this is a threat multiplier. Actually climate change is possibly the greatest risk management failure in history. And it's been coming towards us with incredible, predictable fatalism. I've worked in this for nearly 30 years, and I've been making the same talks for 30 years, and it's not surprising that people are getting a bit agitated. Plus, we have gentlemen like this. This is Mr. Bolsonaro in Brazil, who's just recently been elected. Another wave of the populist nationalism, which seems to be sweeping the world. He's described climate change as greenhouse fables and plans to cut down large swathes of the Amazon, evicting the indigenous people in the process. Plus, you guys all work in an industry which has, in some ways, a very intimate connection with the natural world. And what we have done within our lifetimes to the natural world is inexcusable. The Worldwide Fund for Nature's Living Planet report has been documenting the decline in wild vertebrate biomass. We have lost 60% of our wild animal biomass since 1970. Again, that's within all of the lifespans of the people in this room. That's gone up from 52% 4 years ago. So over half of all the animals in the world gone in our lifetime. How do you explain that to your kids and your grandchildren in terms of our legacy? And all the insects have gone too. This is the other incredible thing that we've been seeing. A German study recently showed a 70 to 80% decline in insects, the pollinators, the beasties that get out that feed most of our other wildlife. The German study showed a 70-80% decline in the last 25 years. And a very similar study in Puerto Rico showed something comparable. And it's not just the neonicotinoids, it's the changes in land use. If you remember, and hands up if people do recall this, but I grew up in East Anglia. You know, I'm a Norfolk boy by upbringing. And I remember car journeys at night in the summer where we used to call it the moth snowstorm. You know, it was like hyperspace. It was like Star Wars to us as kids. My brothers and I would sit there, you know, as the moths came past the windscreen. And it was like being in the Millennium Falcon. And you don't see that now. You drive at night in East Anglia and there are no moths. Barely a moth hits the windscreen. So something serious is happening out there. And insect fertility also plummets in heat waves. The hot weather we've had this year makes it very difficult for insects to breed. It's mainly the problem for the male insects, unfortunately, but the heat waves that are becoming more common. Actually, it's very much in line with the fact that male Western fertility has also decreased by 50% in the last 40 years. So, yeah, our fertility is going down in line with the insects. And what happens in the most extreme examples is if you get 2 heat waves within 10 days of each other, pretty much the fertility success of a male beetle goes down by 99%. It effectively wipes them out. So these volatile temperatures are impacting insects, which are cold-blooded creatures, remember. They don't regulate their body temperature in the same way that we do. So we've got something serious going on. We've lost our meadows. Our meadows are disappearing at a massive rate. We've lost almost all, about 95%, I think, of wild flower meadows and wild grass meadows have gone, and that's also had a massive impact. And we've already touched on the fact, Duncan mentioned, that soil fertility is also crashing as well. You know, we've talked about the fact we may be 30 or 40 years away from eradicating soil fertility entirely, 100 harvests left. And that's because we've rinsed it, you know. We have essentially been fighting a war with nature, and we're winning. And it's not a war you want to win. You know, I started my career as a marine biologist, as a fisheries biologist, out there looking at fish stocks. And I was inspired around sustainability because the wonderful thing about fishing was like, if you understood the population dynamics of the fish stock, you know, you could work out broadly what you would be able to harvest, and in order to maintain a healthy, dynamic and viable stock into the future. And I realised as a fisheries biologist that every single political and economic decision-making overrode the reality of the science. And I appreciated then that I was going to spend my whole career saying, if you don't stop catching all the fish, there won't be any fish. Which is what brought me into this broad environmental campaigning and futurism that I focus on now. And the same thing is happening with our soils. You know, we have to have far more inputs in terms of the agrochemicals and the embodied carbon in order to get the same level of fertility and productivity out of a soil which is denuded. So all of this comes back to what Will Stephan at the Stockholm Resilience Centre calls the Great Acceleration. Because it doesn't matter which of these trends we look at. I try not to put too many graphs in presentations, and then I cheat by putting 20 exponential. And that's partly because of population growth. At the turn of the 20th century, there was 1.6 billion people on the planet. At the turn of the 21st century, there was 6.5 billion. We've tipped over 7 billion now. But it's not just population growth, it's our consumption in the developed world that is driving this. It's not about India and China. They have much bigger numbers, but we have the bigger individual footprint. So again, we have started to unravel paradise in 2 generations. And that's the challenge that we should be thinking about going forward. I love this cartoon from the New Yorker, which this is from Tom Toro. The gentleman sat around the fire with ragged kids saying, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. And we laugh at that, and the fact that we laugh at that is because we know it in some way to be true. And if we know it's true, well, how are we playing it? You know, we are not handing on a great legacy as it currently stands. Plus, as well as massive, catastrophic, avoidable acts of self-harm that we now have to make the best of, like climate change, we also have the challenge of Brexit. 4 ministerial resignations this morning, by the way, just in the news. 2 cabinet ministers, 2 junior ministers. I'll have to see how this one pans out. And this is also going to make life very difficult for us. And you know, when your own monarch is at the state opening of Parliament and wears a hat which is vaguely reminiscent of the EU flag, when your Prime Minister is being trolled by her own Queen, you know you live in interesting times in terms of the provocations. So I think we could be forgiven. Elon Musk says, actually, it's highly likely we're living in a simulation. We are actually all a simulation organised by some super hyper-intelligent future species. And that would explain, actually, all of the madness of the last couple of years. It would explain Brexit, Trump, you know, Bolsonaro now, all of these things unravelling. It's because someone's basically got their hands on the levers of the game, going, what happens if we do this? This would be amazing. You know, let's see if we can really shake things up down there and deal with the consequences. And the reason I talk about this is because this is Anthea Hamilton's Project for a Door, an installation at Tate Britain, Art Gallery in London. This is our humanity having to look up its own fundament moment. You know, we have come up against ourselves. You know, we're a curious, intelligent, creative species, and every curious, intelligent, and creative species at some point bumps up against the limits, the carrying capacity of its environment. It's inevitable. That's what exploratory species do as they pioneer. The proving ground is how we react when we hit up against those limits. Do we blindly blunder on regardless, hoping that everything will work out okay, because that way looks like disaster? Or do we wake up, pay attention to what is happening around us, fully engage with what the science and the materiality of the world is telling us, and change and shift? And I think that's the big challenge, and that's what I've been working on for the last 25, 30 years. And our proposition at Futera is to imagine better. If you want to change the world, first imagine a better one. Give people a tangible, positive, aspirational vision of where they could be going or should be going and where they might go next. Because prosperity, and you know, you guys are all here because you run or want to run better, more successful businesses, providing people with what they need. Prosperity has to be looked at in the round. You know, not just about economic success, certainly not measured by GDP. I don't know if you know the background to GDP, but Simon Kuznets, the economist who developed the idea of gross domestic product, said, whatever you do, don't use this to measure quality of life. And yet, every news report you will ever hear about GDP always uses it as a kind of shorthand for quality of life, that we must improve GDP. Because actually what we need to look at is what it means to be flourishing and thriving in an integrated way. So it's not just about the economics, it's about the social and the environmental context as well. How old? We've got a few venerable companies here. We've just talked about, we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of Service Dealer. How old is the world's oldest company? Okay. Someone plunge in, come on. World's oldest company, how many years? 200. 200, higher? 1,000, higher? 2,000. No, that's the church. It's not a company, I don't think. The actual oldest company is this company. It's 1,400 years old. Founded in AD 578, just to put that in context. It's a company called Congo Gumi, still run by the 42nd generation of the same family that started it. Guess what they do?
Argue.
Almost undoubtedly, as every family business does. No, they build Buddhist temples. So admittedly, it's not a kind of industry which is going rapidly out of fashion, but it says something very powerful about longevity and about planning for the future and planning for succession, as we'll be talking about after coffee. Here's another example of thinking about the future. The law of unintended consequences. Now this is a tin can. This is a brilliant invention, invented in the 19th century. Brilliant for the transportation, storage and preservation of perishable foodstuffs. Fantastic invention. How long between the invention of the tin can and the invention of the can opener? Again, have a guess.
10.
10, higher. 30, higher. 38 years. 38 years of people opening tin cans with hammers and chisels and knives and lacerating themselves. You know, we are brilliant at creating things with no idea about the ultimate and intended consequences of them. I mean, the Costa coffee cup is my personal bugbear, because in one sense, it's design genius, because it's laminated inside so the coffee doesn't leak out, it's got the cardboard corrugation on the outside so it's insulated, it doesn't burn your hand, and then that horrible plastic slit on the top that you suck the coffee through, and so it doesn't spill on you. But it's unrecyclable. So somebody at some point should in that process have gone, what do we do with it after we've drunk the coffee? And instead, you know, we're now doing a retrofit, now they're selling 9 million cups of coffee a day, in order to deal with the unintended consequences of crap design. And so I think we often get it very wrong when we talk about these things. We're also rubbish at predicting what the future might look like. The future always looks like an extension of today. And then my challenge to you is the future is not going to look like an extension of today. It's going to be very different. When they made Back to the Future, you know, it's weird, looks very 80s, doesn't it? There's no accident. Back to the Future was made in the 80s, you know, so everyone's still got stupid 80s haircuts in the future. They're very poor at doing the future. Blade Runner, we're here talking about 2048. So the original Blade Runner was set in 2019 in Los Angeles. You know, Harrison Ford hunting down the replicant robots. Strangely, in Blade Runner, Harrison Ford's still reading a newspaper. You know, the future was definitely all about newspapers. And interestingly, everyone in Blade Runner furiously smoking. And all of these things are because they're extensions or extrapolations of where they were in the 80s. So it's about moving beyond that. But we have the Lawnmower Man. I thought I'd drop this one in terms of future thinking. The 1992 sci-fi horror movie. You remember this is about the gardener with intellectual learning difficulties and who's suddenly enhanced through intelligence increasing drugs and virtual reality. And anyone who's got kids playing Fortnite will know that that does not enhance their intelligence. But then, you know, the Lawnmower Man develops telekinetic and pyrokinetic powers, and then he goes online and he becomes integrated into the internet, and the signal he sends to the world when he becomes one with everything online and becomes pure energy is all the phones in the world ringing simultaneously. So yeah, it's happening now, people. It's happening now. So, the reason I, as a futurist, don't embark on predictions is the predictions get you into a total mess. The reason thing we should be focusing on is stretching the imagination of the possible. Because if you try and predict things, you invariably get it wrong. As I say, you either come from the wrong benchmark, or you can't see the wood from the trees from where you currently sit. And I just thought I'd take you through a couple of the world's classic predictions. There we go. Man will not fly for 50 years. This is from Wilbur Wright in 1901, who was building an aeroplane at the time. How about that for having faith in your own ability? We have this one, which is the horse is here to stay, but the automobile is only a novelty, a fad. That's from the guy who was lending money to Henry Ford to build a car factory. And my favourite, which reflects the sexism and misogyny of 19th century railways, is women's bodies are not designed to go at 50 miles an hour. Their uteruses will fly out of their bodies when accelerated to that speed. That may explain why many British trains cannot go over 50 miles an hour and have standing womb only. Exactly. That is the worst joke of the whole presentation, so don't worry, it's back uphill from here. But the point we're making, and actually the point that Chris made very poignantly in the opening there with his driverless tractor in 1962, is the future's already out there, it's just not evenly distributed yet. You know, and it has been out there for a very long time. The thing is, we have every single technology we need to change the world, to make it a better, more equitable, and more environmental world right now. We already have all the tech. We don't need any new tech. We also have the money. We also have billions, trillions of dollars, pounds, sat, ready to drop into the right investments. The barriers to a better future are here, in terms of our perception and our belief of whether we can make it happen at pace and at scale. And it's how we handle and manage those transitions which is how we define the way that the world will go. And this is where we start to get into your particular world. Because, and I just love this, I go down rabbit holes of research when I'm briefed to do talks like this, which take me on fascinating journeys and lots of different side roads. And I got very into the philosophy of mowing over the last couple of weeks. Because there is something about the futility of mowing lawns that speaks profoundly about the ephemeral nature of life. The fact that we go out and then do it repeatedly again. But also, it says something profound about control. And it says something about our need and our desire to curtail nature. And our need and our desire to make things neat and orderly and presentable. And there's a place for that, sure. But it's whether we can actually understand what the implications of these type of relations are when we start to look at the anthropology of the activities that we undertake. And, you know, when I was joking about losing all of our meadows, I suspect we will see a resurgence of non-mowing culture. I think it's already begun, in terms of people wanting to see the return of diverse wildflower meadows. There'll still be some mowing involved, but perhaps a lot less than we might expect if we were trying to keep a regular linear lawn. And I know Chris has written a wonderful book called The Budding Legacy, but it's important to realise the implications of what happened when this gentleman, Edwin Budding, in 1830 invented this machine. Because as, again, you'll be familiar with, the budding effect led to this huge explosion in the ability of football pitches and cricket pitches and tennis courts to be neatly mown rather than hacked away with a scythe and scissors. And in many ways led to the sort of explosion in sporting opportunity that we still enjoy today. But the key thing is, as well, it's like the budding machine did not destroy jobs per se. It may have pissed off the guy who used to bring the goats onto the field to trim the pitch, because he got put out of a job, but it created many other jobs. And the transition to the future is not about sticking with a technology that is fading. It's about understanding how technology and opportunity is moving and trying to create the jobs with that transition and with that diffusion of innovation. Resistance is futile. And actually resistance is probably fatal in that sense. So we will destroy some jobs, but we will create new ones. And when we look back, I think, I got into the anthropology of mowing because I think the choices and the kind of evolution of mowers, without getting massively into the past, says something about the times that we lived in at those moments, in the same way that Back to the Future said a lot about the 80s. The techno-optimism, the futurism of the 1950s, you know, the lazy man's power mower. I love it on the card, if you read the text there, it says, does chores, runs errands. I mean, I'm not sure you want to go down to the shops and that kind of thing, but it represents the Mad Men era, you know, the Jetsons, you know, when people were driving around in massive 6-litre engine cars along huge empty freeways. I mean, to me as a marine biologist, this thing looks like it should be going down into the Mariana Trench rather than scooting around on the lawn. And I love the expression on the wife and child's face. So they look on in a sort of mixture of fascination and pity. At the gentleman here. This is the lawn mowing man's mid-1950s midlife crisis, bought immediately before a nervous breakdown. And then we have, obviously, another great example here of a throwback, the first remote control mower, you know, beating the tractor by 3 years, 1959. This fantastic device travelled at nearly 2 miles an hour in order to mow your lawn. And again, it was about this kind of wonderful sense of control. Apparently the radio control, this worked up to 1 mile away. Can you imagine remotely mowing almost 1 mile away from your mower? What could possibly go wrong? And then we have the white heat of technology carrying on in the 50s. You know, Chris Cockrell's hovercraft and Harold Wilson's white heat of technology. I remember going on a hovercraft with my father to the Isle of Wight. Absolutely fantastic experience. And that obviously inevitably came into the world of mowing with the hover mower, taking that inspiration, floating on a cushion of air. Everyone had the bright orange Flymo in their garden in the 70s, which led to the backlash about everything being a lot less bother than a hover. But in a sense, what was happening was this increasing arms race, this increasing battle with nature, the battle with the lawn, the mastery, what kind of engine can we have, what kind of device can we use to control that unruly lawn growth. And Philip Larkin, the famous poet, wrote a lot about this. And just this quote from him in 1981 saying, "Have bought new lawnmower, ready for the spring offensive. Must get the flamethrower service and invest in a few gallon drums of weed oil." This is someone with a fantastic poetic sensibility. Basically gearing up for some kind of onslaught on his own back garden. And I think that says a lot. And then we've got into the idea of, the increasing trend towards labour saving. So we have the mechanisation, we go from the scythe, we go to the mechanical mower, we go to the motorised mower, we go to the remote mower, and then you get people using genuine human ingenuity to really reduce the manpower involved in mowing the lawn. I mean, genius, absolute genius. What else do you need apart from your mobility scooter and a piece of rope in order to be able to drive around and go? Who's been selling mobility scooters? You're missing an opportunity here. There's obviously a huge gap in the market for combining these two different bits together. Yes. Again, you get the idea. What could possibly go wrong? And now, of course, we're on the point of looking at, where are we in terms of the robo-mow and the kind of the next generation of artificially intelligent mowers. I mean, they cost thousands of pounds, as well you know. And I'm looking forward for when, the artificially intelligent mower becomes sentient. When it finally does have a mind of its own, like that scene in Terminator, it becomes conscious, and you find it down the bottom of the garden, like I used to find my dad in the 70s, hiding behind a hedge with a cold beer and a fag. And you go, what's the robo-mow doing? It's just having a break. It's just enjoying the sunshine. But I think the anthropology here is the fact that this is the epitome of the disconnection. Mowing the lawn used to be a simple pleasure. We used to have a relationship with the lawn. I still remember the smell of the fresh lawn clippings. And the idea that we now just have a programmed bot which wanders around has just sucked every last bit of pleasure out of the experience. It's not supposed to be a chore. It's supposed to be a joy. And I think this disconnection is saying something profound about where we have to go next in the future, because it is taking us further and further away from our connection with the wild and natural world around us. And it's only going to get more intense in terms of what's happening with the data. People I imagine you're all talking, you're dealing with selling bits of kit which are kind of connected online, gathering data, getting more information. 90% of the world's data has been collected in the last 2 years. 90% of the world's data collected in the last 2 years. We talk about the exponentials on the Great Acceleration, it's going vertical, this particular curve. All of this stuff, every minute of every day, this is what is being gathered globally. So 4.5 million YouTube videos watched every minute, nearly 4 million Google searches, over 1,000 Amazon packages delivered every minute, 2 million Snapchat pictures shared every minute. This is an absolute kind of cascade of data. It adds up to 2.5 quintillion bytes of data a day. You don't even know what a quintillion is, do you? No. It's like, that's good, it's totally normal, because a quintillion is a number so big, it's sort of beyond human comprehension. It's 10 to the power 18. If 1 second was 1 byte of data, that's about 32 billion years worth of time. So those of us who remember the ZX81 in the 80s, the first home computer which had a working memory of 1K. Remember those simple times? You can't even get an email that's 1K now. But the point I'm making is actually when we have the Internet of Things, we talk about adding all our equipment, whether it's lawnmowers, tractors or whatever, onto the Internet of Things, it's going to get even more intense. We've currently got about 20 billion objects online globally, but by 2020 it's going to be 200 billion. So we're going to see a tenfold increase in the next 2 years of internet-connected devices. And why is that important? Well, I mean, partly because we're actually putting things online that really shouldn't be online. You know, do you want your rectal temperature shared with the world? I don't know. I'm not sure I do. But the point I'm making is this is a kind of tsunami of data which is coming through. And actually, the aggregation of that data and the storage of that data means that actually the carbon footprint and the energy consumption of that data is going to be the same as global aviation and global shipping. And so it's significant. Plus, it means that this could be consuming 20% of global electricity by 2025. And only 20% of that currently comes from renewables. So we have this massive surge in the energy consumption and use of data. Having said that, it's also good to know the ingenious people behind some of the interesting things happening. Who knows who this gentleman is? You recognise him? This is Peter Dearman, who is a British shed inventor. He did something very interesting with his lawnmower. He got it to run using a can of antifreeze on liquid air. And he's tinkering around in his back garden. And the wonderful thing is like by taking liquid air, as the liquid air warms up, obviously it goes from liquid to gaseous, and it expands, so it creates a pressure. And you can use that to drive an engine. So we got his lawnmower running on the kind of the depressurized air coming from the liquid air. It didn't generate quite enough energy in order to make it worthwhile as a form of propulsion. But the fantastic thing is also as you take liquid air into gaseous air, you also get a massive cooling effect. And so he's invented what he calls a Dearman engine, which is now being put into refrigerated trucks because it replaces the diesel refrigeration unit that is currently on there. So it's a fantastic lawnmower-based invention which is helping to tackle climate change. Sainsbury's have started using it on their refrigerated vehicle fleet, and it's saving hundreds of tons of CO2 across the fleet. So there's also wonderful things that can come from these type of bits of ingenuity. But the future, let's look at the real future of where your industry is going. And it's going to be decentralized. It's going to be small. You know, the tractor is probably dead. It's not going to disappear. But I was talking to Chris beforehand, and we were discussing about how the scale and weight of these vehicles and the damage and then the compression and the impacts that they're currently having on soil means that light, mobile, decentralized systems are probably going to be the way forward. So this is Eco Robotics. This is a Swiss company. It's a solar-powered robot. They're trying to tackle the $26 billion a year agrochemical industry. And they reckon that this system uses 90% less pesticide. It's what they call a see and spray technology, you know, actually filming and identifying which plants and actually very specifically targeting them with the chemical load that they need. And there's lots of diversification going on in the sector as well. Blue River Technology use the same see and spray technology, talk about optimizing every plant. So what is needed, where it's needed. And again, this is massively disruptive in terms of efficiency. This company was bought by John Deere in 2017 for $305 million. You know, they can see where the future is going, and they can see that they need to change and they need to shift. And you know, in the UK, and I was lucky enough, I was actually having dinner with some friends in London about 6 months ago. I was just chatting with this guy on the other side of the table, and I said, "What do you do?" He goes, "I build small robots." And I was sat opposite the guy behind a small robot company. Brilliant British business. What they're focusing on is small robots, not big tractors. More efficient, more precise, kinder to the soil and kinder to the environment. And the data speaks for itself. 95% less energy, 90% less pesticide, 95% less CO2 emissions, as much as 90% less fertilizer. I mean, that's a no-brainer in terms of an ecological mindset of doing the right thing for the environment and the soil which sustains our lives. You know, this is the most fundamental. It's clever, it's smart, and it's purposeful, and it's transformative. And they've got a whole bunch of different robots. This is Tom. I'm going to do this like a dating website. So this is Tom. He does always-on crop monitoring, for precision agriculture. Tom lives on your farm and digitizes your fields. He monitors them on a plant-by-plant basis, keeping track of the health and development of each and every single plant. He lives in a kennel on your farm. He returns to it when he's out of charge and replaces his battery for a fully charged one. Then he also downloads the gigabytes of data he's collected for analysis. And Tom works alongside a digital crop data model. So he's basically mapping everything and feeding it into the main operating system. Tom knows exactly where your plants are, whether they're germinated, what they need, and also can suggest exactly what fertilisers and chemicals you might need to maximise your crop. And if you agree, you can call out his mates, Dick and Harry, to deliver them. Tom is chatty and curious. I took this off their website, so I just thought it was hilarious. Then we have Dick. Dick looks a bit scary, actually. I think, you know, when the alien robots come down, they're probably going to look like Dick. Dick lives back at Small Robot Central. So Dick, you just call in. When Tom's been out in the field, he'll say, we need Dick. And we need Dick now. Who's laughing at that? Come on. So Dick microsprays, each plant with fertilisers or chemicals as required to help them thrive. So he precisely sprays the fertiliser or chemical onto the roots or where it's needed. Or Dick can also burn weeds with a laser or crush them with a kind of mechanical destruction technique. So Dick is ruthless and efficient. So don't date Dick. And then we have Harry. And Harry is the other one who also comes from Small Robot Central, doesn't live in a kennel on the farm. Basically, Harry is the world's first robotic drill for actually planting crops. Gives you driverless, super accurate drilling, maps exactly where he's planted every seed, and passes that information back into the central holding system. Harry is the boring one. He's measured and precise. You know, probably the one that your mum would approve of. And then, back at the ranch, we have Wilma. Now, Wilma is like Hal out of 2001, A Space Odyssey. Wilma is the central kind of AI intelligence behind farming as a service that Tom, Dick and Harry feed all of their data back into. And let's hope that Wilma has our best interests at heart. She is smart and incisive. You notice Wilma is running the show. Tom, Dick and Harry are just going around and doing what they're told. But this is the future. This is where it's going. This is going to be where our future farming is at. There are other options as well. This is another device from Bosch. Doesn't look quite as cutesy as Tom, Dick or Harry, it has to be said. And this device deals with weeds the old-fashioned way, violently. This device punches weeds to death. This is what happens when you allow a bloke to design weed. You know. So it punches weeds to death by smashing them violently back into the ground. But that's actually good. If you think about it from an ecological perspective, you don't need the chemical. You destroy the weed, but actually all the nutrients go straight back into the soil. So you're not extracting something, you're putting it back into the ecology. As we said, you know, we do have this idea of the laser destroying weed robots. I'm actually involved in a lot of entrepreneurial startups and early stage startups around sustainability. And we were talking about this the other day, and one of my co-investors, Andy, just looked at me and went, what could possibly go wrong? And I was saying, yeah, okay, imagine, you know, the thoughts of hordes of small robots armed with lasers patrolling the countryside, you know, being hacked by Russian bot farms. Yeah, there's obviously some risks involved, but not insurmountable. I'm sure we can get around them. Actually, it's more prosaic. The future of a weed laser robot probably looks more like this. This is Jati. This is an Austrian company. This is going to do a slight stretch for you, using detailed drone mapping of agricultural landscapes and also restoration landscapes, and then using drones in order to plant seeds or replant forests. And these are amazing in terms of the fact that, you know, by mapping the land, we can look at the soil types, we can fire the right type of seeds into the right places on the landscape. And actually, it means you can put the right nutrients in alongside the seed that you plant. You can do 100,000 trees in a day with one of these drones, or with a fleet of these drones. It's 10 times faster than people and half the price. So you think about large-scale ecological restoration, this offers us fantastic opportunities for restoring and replenishing the forests that we've cut down. Plus, drone technology is getting tiny. And now we're looking at the idea of these robo-bees. So these are autonomously flying microbots, which can be used in crop pollination, search and rescue missions, all different types of surveillance in terms of weather and climate and environmental monitoring. They're about half the size of a paperclip at the moment, weigh less than 1/10 of a gram, and they use artificial muscles, which are sort of designed on the same basis in biomimicry as a real life bee, and they just contract when an electrical charge is applied, which gives the ability to fly. These are not going to be around immediately. They still reckon this technology is 20 years away, but I thought in terms of a kind of little taste of the future, it's worth having a look at what the robo-bee is already able to do right now.
This is a robo-bee. These miniature robots are inspired by the biology of bees and hive behavior. New materials, compact high-energy power sources, and new control systems, and a new method of self-assembly and pop-up manufacturing. I'm Elizabeth Farrell, a PhD student at SEAS. I am energized by the potential of an autonomous device that thinks on its own. It could impact everything from crop pollination to search and rescue. And that's science, not fiction.
Yeah, so it's coming. This is all coming down the track. There's also hybrid versions. Before we get that, some scientists have decided that a better way of doing this is to put a small backpack on a real live dragonfly, which you can actually control by electrically stimulating the nerves, so you can steer it to where you want it to go. This is the kind of cyber world. This is reality. This is not. I'm not making this up. This is already happening out there now. This is the kind of bridge towards the robo-bee that will be coming down the track. And this farming as a service, which is essentially what the small robot company is beginning to offer, is, I think, the future. I do not believe that we will have the same transactional type of relationships in terms of purchasing goods or products. I think what we're looking at is this massive shift towards services. And this is what you might call platform capitalism. It's the capitalism where it's going back from that individual dealer type relationship to actually a much more collective, cumulative and collaborative type of sharing of different things. And the sharing economy is already impinging in lots of different ways. You've seen the stuff that's already happening with cars, because what it also is built on is efficiency and trust. If you look in London at car ownership, less than half of London houses own a car, and 90% of cars sit idle 90% of the time. In terms of idling assets, it's a completely pointless waste of energy and resources. And I suspect we're going to go into a similar type of scenario in agriculture. There's a lot of platform cooperatives popping up now. There is no reason why a platform capitalist business cannot be a platform cooperative. There's no reason why Uber needs to siphon off money to pay a whole bunch of Silicon Valley dickheads vast amounts of money. There's no reason why Uber cannot be owned by the drivers and the passengers. And I think the next generation of platform businesses will start to be seen as cooperatives, because there's no reason why we can't be investors and customers at the same time. Transport as a service is already really kicking off in terms of the fact that it's cheaper to now hire a car by the hour for the occasional times you might want to use it from a car club or from a car sharing club, particularly in cities, than it is to own and run a vehicle yourself. So when it becomes cheaper to do that and the convenience is there, we know what history tells us. Cost and convenience drive most of our decision making, whether we like it or not. So when something becomes cheaper and easier, that's what wins. The Rethink X report, which is looking at the future of driverless electric vehicles, is saying that actually, when we get transport as a service kicking in, which could be within the next 10 years, will we see 70% fewer passenger cars and trucks manufactured? 70% less. I suspect your industry will see similar trends as farming as a service comes in. This 70% reduction looks like a total disruption of the car value chain. If I was in the German car manufacturing economy, I would be quaking a little bit right now, because all of the car dealers, maintenance, insurance companies suffering almost complete destruction, and complete destruction coming very rapidly down the track. So I think, in some ways, we already have all the kit we need. So much of this is about sharing what we have. It is about the relationships. It is about, what the Wurzels sang about all those years ago. I've got a brand new combine harvester and I'll give you the key. You know, and that's what we need to be doing. We need to be sharing these resources in a different way. And I'll finish up just talking a little bit about the underground farm and some of the final things that Duncan mentioned right at the beginning. So this is one of the businesses that I'm invested in and sit on the board of. This is Steve and Rich, two crazy cider drinking Bristolians who used to sit down the pub arguing about how we're going to feed the world in the future. And unlike most of us, they got off their asses and did something about it. They took on this disused tube tunnel, which is actually an old Second World War air raid shelter under Clapham North in South London, 30 metres underground. It was built as an air raid shelter and was designed to be reincorporated into an additional branch of the Northern Line after the war, which never happened. But they took this tunnel and they converted it into this, which is a renewable energy powered, LED lit, hydroponic farm, as I say, 30 metres under Clapham North in South London. Farm to fork in 4 hours. You know, incredible freshness, incredible nutritional value, and incredible speed to market. And they're now looking at farming in all sorts of different marginal spaces. It doesn't have to be tube tunnels, it can be old warehouses, rooftops, you name it. That's where they're looking to expand. And you're also seeing other initiatives like Energy Garden, which is planting and growing food crops and hops on overground railway stations in London, all funded by the revenues from renewable energy through solar panels. It's being run by a friend of mine, Agamemnon Otero. Plus, we're also seeing new fuels coming out of systems that we perhaps haven't anticipated being a great source of fuel. So I'm also an investor in a business called Benaman, which is essentially looking at anaerobic digestion of things like grass clippings in order to generate biomethane for fuel. So, you know, basically we're replicating the digestive process of a cow's gut and capturing the methane and using it as a fuel to drive vehicles in the future. And our cities are going to look very different. I will talk a bit more and expand a bit more on my urbanisation piece, but there's no reason why our cities cannot look far more green and verdant and productive and fertile than the way that they currently look now. You know, this is what the potential, this is the kind of schematic view of what Paris could look like when we start to look at the green buildings, the hairy buildings, and the incorporation of more green space into the urban environment. And this is a mock-up of Beirut as well. You see the kind of the green rooftops and the cascading plants. And less of this, because this is the other thing that's happening in parallel. It's not all good news. It's like people putting artificial lawns in all over the place, covering up their green space and replacing it with polyester because it looks neater. Plus, I think we'll see more complementary permaculture type agriculture, which requires more human or robot input and much less mechanical input, because this allows complementary planting. This allows us to plant things alongside each other which help each other grow and reduce further the needs for pesticides and herbicides. And I think, to finish, I come back to that point, that we're on a journey here in terms of our relationship with the natural world around us and a reconnection with it. My concern is that the machinery can perhaps separate us and disconnect us from that further, and machinery is making our lives more difficult in terms of the issues we have to face in terms of soil health and fertility and driving the impacts of climate change. So the future's out there, it's just not evenly distributed yet, and let's finish in terms of imagining better with a poem from Philip Larkin called The Mower. And this is about him running over a hedgehog. The mower stalled twice. Kneeling, I found a hedgehog jammed up against the blades. Killed, it had been in the long grass. I'd seen it before and even fed it once. Now I had mauled its unobtrusive world unmendably. Burial was no help. Next morning I got up and it did not. The first day after a death, the new absence, is always the same. We should be careful of each other. We should be kind while there is still time. Thank you very much.